Hey, how's it going? V Decron here. We're gonna be going over a build today. This is actually gonna be the first time I version 2 a build, if you will. Um, so kind of stick with me here, all right? So the build we're gonna be going over, who would have guessed, is gonna be Great Axe Blunderbuss. I wanted to get like the finalized version that, from my perspective, like these are the ways you can play this class effectively, and then very easily get large kill games. Like for example, last night alone, I got a 38 kill game, and I was just off running around a good chunk by myself. We definitely had times where we were playing as a 5-man effectively, like we had a very standard war comp. But overall, like this build is incredibly powerful in the right hands. It takes some time to learn some of the iframes and such that you need to be very confident on in order to succeed at this build. But that's just general game knowledge. And that's going to apply to any build you play. So just be aware of that starting out. Things we're going to go over today. We're going to go over the stats. We're going to go over the equipment perks. We're going to go over the abilities. We'll talk about when to use certain abilities, how to use certain abilities, heart rune choices, passives that you need to be activating regularly and pay attention to when you're activating them to really maximize the effect of this build. And then after all of that is done, then we'll talk about like the small details that the average player may not need to know. But if you really care about magnifying your ability on this build, you'll watch through the entire thing. Because every detail is another way to leverage your advantage, knowing that you have these tools at your disposal. But yeah, with that being said, I think I named it something cowboy, the unstoppable cowboy or something. In the spirit of this video essentially being recorded slash streamed on Christmas Eve, we're calling it Santa's shotgun, and the presents are the bullets. The gifties are the people you're facing in OPR. So let's give a lot of holiday cheer to our fellow fucking OPR enjoyers, right? But this is the de-facto Great Axe Blunderbuss build guide. No questions about it. There's not a single build guide out on YouTube that's going to give you more information than you're going to get in this video. But yeah, let's kick this off. So I have that. If you look down below, there's already a build guide. You can just look at that very quickly, set your stuff. But ultimately, I'd recommend watching this, understanding the abilities and why you're running the things you're running. All right, so let's get out of my house so I can actually open my inventory. What? Oh yeah, different. I had POE on the brain. All right, so we'll go over stats first. So there's a couple different stat breakdowns you can go with here. If you are in an OPR and you're comfortable with the build, you can get away with at the absolute lowest 100 con, and even that comes with a lot of stipulations. Like you're gonna want a healer in order to really make this work, unless you've put in a couple weeks into this build. Otherwise, I'd definitely recommend for OPR purposes, you sit at a 150. War purposes, if it is a competitive war, you can go up to 200. We'll show you a way that you can make it so like you can very quickly change that in the middle of a war instead of having to redo your stats. Strength wise, I've actually found that it's more valuable to have 150 intelligence over 350 strength. The damage is a little bit lower, especially when it comes to the great axe. When it comes to your abilities, but your left clicks are really where your moneymaker is on this build. And this directly increases 50% of your damage. So this is about a 5% damage increase just to your left clicks. Whereas with the style of your build, you're not very often under 90% health. It sometimes is valuable when, ultimately it happens, right? But I'd rather have a 5% all the time than a 7% sometimes. There's also the 10% base damage increase to abilities, but ultimately that's not to left clicks. And the purpose of this build is we want to be walking around like we have a pocket rocket in our hands, and every time we fire, that shit like tears out the enemies, right? So this would probably be a very standard stat breakdown. One thing I would love to get to the point, just with the way my gear is right now, I kind of have some forced strength I have to resolve. But what I want to do is I want to have 250 strength and go up to 50 focus here. I'm waiting to do this ultimately until I get Ankh. But when I'm playing solo, sometimes I'll pull out I'll drop 50 con here and I'll go to 100 con. And I'll go to 50 focus for the 10% incoming healing. As that means anytime I step in a sacred, it's more. Anytime I pop a potion, it's 10% more. And anytime ultimately that I dodge and proc Shirky heals, it's more, right? But this I would say is your standard stat breakout. So we're just gonna leave it like that, right? Next, what we're gonna do. Good morning, paid actor. Saw you yesterday in a couple of streams. I believe you're real now. But next thing we're gonna go over is the equipment that you have to run for this build to actually work. So absolute minimum, in my opinion, is obviously gonna be Blunderbuss Great Axe. Who would have guessed the two weapons of the build, right? But artifact wise, it's gonna be the Tempest Fury Great Axe. This is a huge part of the build here. The 3% movement speed for 3 seconds is very easy to keep it up. There's no cooldown. Every time you shoot, it refreshes every stack. It's incredibly powerful, right? Now, the one thing I really want to stress though is 3 seconds is not a long time. 3 seconds is not a long time. If you get stunned, staggered, and you don't have this haste that you can then immediately refresh after you finally get out of it, it's going to be very hard for you to keep your distance and survive while also still applying damage. So just keep that in mind. That's why for our armor artifact, we're going to be running the winged leather shoes. This increases our base duration of haste on you by 50%. So that is 50% of 3 seconds. So now we're at 4.5 seconds. We also run, now if this was Ankh, it'd be hard for me to justify putting alacrity on it. But if this is the only build you're playing and you have Ankh, I'd put alacrity on here. The reason for this is 34% is nothing to sneeze at. 34% is still a whole extra second on a 3 second length buff here, right? So now you're going from 3 seconds, you get an extra 1.5 seconds, right? Because of the winged leather shoes. And then you get an extra 1 second for the alacrity. So that puts you, right, at a total of 5.5 seconds, give or take. That's what it says. Like if you literally just do the math here, right? But I actually have reason to believe that it may not be that simple because like the buff is showing 6 and it sits on 6 for a second. So it actually looks like it's like 6.5 seconds from like personal experience. And I'm just having trouble like really validating that objectively. Because one would expect that if a buff is going to sit at 6 seconds, it's going to um, if it's going to sit with the 6 showing, it's because it's over 6 seconds, not because it's between 5 and 6. But maybe that's just the game designer in me assuming basic rules. But anyways, that's the artifacts. We've talked also about the haste synergy we have here. Now, when it comes to your regular armor, the goal is to get 5 shirking heals. That's the absolute minimum. You need to get 5 shirking heals for this build. Being able you can dodge through ranged projectiles, and when you get actually pretty decent at predicting the musket shots, what you can do is use that to gain distance, gain a heal, and now you have the momentum there. So as you see here, we have 5 shirking heals here. We also have a lot of enchanted ward, and that's just because of the nature of, hey, we're gonna have melee players on us that are trying to left click us. We're going to have those bows that are sitting there who see us, and those muskets who see us, and they're firing their weapon. It's rough, right? Like enchanted ward is one of the easiest ways to reduce that across the board, regardless of how they gem their weapons. Now I'm running 2 health right now. The plan long term is to replace this, just waiting on Gorgon inductors and the time mats, right? But I have 2 health here. I want to replace one of these or both of these health with thrust conditioning, as I found that the biggest problem I've really had hasn't been fire mages anymore. It's truly the really cracked bows or the really cracked muskets. If they see me before I see them, it's just over. A part of me wants to just chalk that up to it's usually in an open field because like if I get real close to these players, I usually win. No questions asked. Even some of the better ones, like Silver Chase, for example. But if they see me coming from like even like 20, 25 meters away, it's over, right? So that's why I think 2 thrust conditioning would go really far here. As you see here, we're still running a frigid glove. I do plan to upgrade this to 725, where I'm going to replace the elemental aversion with empowering claw shot, most likely. The hoplite pants here, this is an easy one to grab. It gives you a refreshing, it gives you shirking heals. As your third perk, you still have to like put it on there. It's not going to come on there by default, so just prepare for that investment. And then Enchanted Word, of course, right? Because like the two default here is Enchanted Word and Refreshing. We want another Enchanted Word, as we discussed earlier. The Shirking Heals is get given. So like this is kind of a, we have to run a 3 perk here. Because we're medium armor, we don't really have to care about things like Shirking Energy, for example. So it's pretty nice that we're able to grab a 3 perk pretty easy on the set. And then of course 725 boots, you're going to be running Shirking Heals. I already said you got to run 5 stacks here. It's nice that we get an extra stack of freedom, because with the medium armor weight we already sit at 10% freedom. To be honest, to be able to fit one more freedom, maybe I, instead of getting the claw shot, I actually go for another freedom, because that means I'm guaranteed to not be able to be full heavied by a great or a warhammer. I will say with the haste, I don't think it's really that necessary, so I'm probably still gonna go with claw shot. But like this is the beauty of this game, right? There's no truly one right answer. This is just me trying to share my experience with you. This is probably the part that I'll get clowned on for, but I don't even care. The perk pool for Tempest Fury is absolute dog shit as your final perk. Um, Mortal Energy has saved my life multiple fucking times. It's actually pretty crazy. Plus 50 stamina on kill with a 1 second cooldown. Like when you're fighting multiple people, that one extra dodge, because if you're not Great Bard, that plus 50 means that suddenly you can dodge again if you have even 1 stamina. Can be the difference between life or death, just flat out. Like people have literally asked me, how the fuck do I have so much stamina? This is a big part of it, alongside a couple of the ability masteries that we go with. I still haven't beaten the worm on this character. We're looking to fix that probably in the next week. But like I don't even need this to drop some. Like I dropped a 38 kill game last night at like prime time. Like I don't really know how else I can phrase that. Like this perk, as great as it would be to basically like triple the amount of spins you get guaranteed, especially with 100% movement speed, it's not necessarily required to make the build work, and that's something I can at least appreciate. For the blunderbuss itself, though, these are the 3 perks I'm recommending. You're gonna go with Disdained Infliction. There's a lot of dots that we run in this build. The potency of those outgoing dots are increased by 15%, pretty massive here. Plague Spitting Grenades is a given. You got to be able to plague them. Plague crits is a given. Like this is like artificial damage, where instead of just doing more damage, you're making it so they can't heal more. You have to actually make sure that these plagues hit. If for example, you're just auto aim, or like you're just aimbot using, or the fucking aim lock using the Plague Splitting Grenades, right? You're most likely going to miss them. I actually experienced that quite a bit, where I had to get into a habit of always turning off the aim lock in order to get that to actually guarantee hit. Plague crits is pretty easy, especially if you don't use aim lock, in my opinion. But like by default, you're going to crit once every probably like 3 or 4 shots. Now, I will say though, this is, if you can play this successfully and you get over about a 70-80% hit ratio without aim lock, this build is even better without aim lock. Like the games that I've really sweated, where I can't really talk because I'm just focused on shooting and making sure my shots land, and I'm just like ching ching, ching. That shit feels real good, and it's very successful. I think enough reps of it, and I'd probably be able to do that pretty reliably. I value my comms more than I do that extra like 5 to 10% of performance. Aim lock means that you can basically hit that 90%, and then focus on everything else that matters around you. Because what I also noticed was when I was really locked into hitting those shots, I wouldn't care about what was around me unless I had to dodge it or I had to make distance from it. Those were the only 2 things I was paying attention to, and it got me killed a couple times, to be honest. So like it's all about what are you using your brain power for when playing the game. Now, we already went over the fact we're running Alacrity, but otherwise, Health, Divine, I think this is pretty standard. I think with our lower Constitution pool, if you're not running Ankh, you could probably get away with an Alacrity, Divine Stam Recovery, or an Alacrity, Divine Strike, or not Strike, Thrust Ward. I think that would actually be pretty powerful on this build. We're running really low health, but ultimately 7% increase of my health means 7% increase of my Shirking Heals. And then, of course, the ring. I don't have the 725 yet, but 719 still pretty solid gear score for this. But Purifying Heart, this is pretty useful because every time I go to kick, and kick is up pretty often here, I'm able to essentially refresh or like clear any debuff that's, if I'm rooted, for example. So if somebody gets me with a vines because they think they can kill me, I can immediately kick, which is going to get rid of all the rends, diseases, etc. And then I'm probably going to dodge back, right? Probably proc that Shirking Heals, and now that's a full Shirking Heals proc. And I'm just chilling at that point. Healing Breeze procs off of Shirking Heals. Yes, it's reduced by 35% if applied to yourself, but it's still every little bit of healing matters here. It's about staying alive by being able to dodge the huge burst and only taking tick damage, if that makes sense. Hardy is a given. I'm not going to go into details. If you're not running Hardy on your build, it doesn't matter what build you're running. You are throwing. The two rigs I've been bouncing between. So if I'm running like 100 con to 150 con at most, I'm going to be running this here. This is going to be Hoplite's Earring with Fortifying Toast and Refreshing Toast. Or no, I'm sorry. I think it's Refreshing and Fortifying Toast by default. Oh no, I'm crazy here. Refreshing Toast by default. I'm pretty sure I put Fortifying Toast on this. Either way, this is still a good 3 perk. I know that the only perk I know for sure is locked in here is Refreshing. I also made an earring that was regenerating on the earring instead. This bad boy right here. If you're running 200 con, I'd actually recommend running this because it's basically a free regen. It's as if you have a regen ticking at all times. The refreshing is just very valuable when you have a team around you, so you want to focus on getting more damage output by reducing your cooldowns. But yeah, that's pretty much it gear-wise. If you have any questions about the gear or something you wish I went over in this, please leave me a comment down below. Otherwise, we're going to go straight into abilities. Sorry, I redid all my controls yesterday, so we're still mapping it out in our heads. All right, so we're gonna go over our defensive tree first. So for Great Axe, the ones we can just grab right off the rip is gonna be the Spin, Whirlwind. The main reason we run this is because of the Fortifying Whirlwind on the Tempest Fury here. That Fortify, because we're medium armor, can make our really small health pool feel much tankier. We're going to increase our maximum spins to 7. We want to have the increased movement speed. One could argue that you could take this off, but there's been plenty of times where I've used this to kind of win more in a fight. You just have to be careful about when you do it. Like this isn't a tide changer. This is a win more button. But that being said, like you don't run Great Well or Gravity Well here, so you don't want to really have to run this talent, right? So I don't see why you wouldn't run this because these, not so much this one, but this one right here is really why we're running it. While holding a Great Axe, gain 20% armor when 3 or more foes are within 4 meters. That means that you can be sitting on a clump, and if you spin, that's a 70% fortify that you can actually reach with these two combinations. We're also going to run Mauler's Resolve. Any extra stamina, this is our defensive weapon. If it's out, that means we're currently fleeing for our life, most likely. So the ability to get 40 stamina every 20 seconds is huge. This is stamina recovery on crack right now. And then we'll also run Enduring Strike. We're not really going to be heavy attacking, but it gives us a 12% base damage reduction while grit is active. And guess what, boys and girls? Whirlwind has grit. So does Charge. Another thing we're going to do here is we're going to run Executioner Speed. So if you can predict when you need to get out of somewhere, just being able to left click once where you hit 2 people in like on the edge of a fight and then immediately whirlwind away, can be pretty crazy with the amount of speed you're going to get from that, especially if you already have the Tempest Fury passive up. Every form of haste we're going to be grabbing in this build is massive. So once again, that 3-second haste now becomes like, per math, right? A like 5.5 second haste. We're also going to run critical at when you crit with a Great Axe, heal yourself for 10% of the damage done. Great Axe does crit more often than other weapons. We're also going to increase like the amount of crit chance we ultimately get by default with this weapon. So any sort of way that we can turn and so that we can heal if our Great Axe is out, we're going to take that. Charge, you could probably just 1 perk this, but I will say that I think that the upgrade here is pretty massive, especially in a 1v1 type of situation when you've isolated somebody and you really need to get that burst window. You do not understand how hard that 140%, like basically a max range charge that would hit, you can have that immediately. And if it's even any sort of distance at all, you're getting an extra 25% damage from that. So I'd really recommend running that. We're trying to get Bloodlust here just because we can use Bloodlust to chase between firing our Blunderbuss because of how long our haste is running. But we're going to run Feed for the fact that it's healing you against low HP targets is pretty massive. And then otherwise, we're going to run Reap here. As Reap allows us to pull an enemy towards us. It has a stagger, which is pretty massive. The range is 8 meters. Being able to pull somebody from 8 meters is huge, especially if you land a grappling hook and then you fire your shot and immediately swap into a Reap. It's very hard to get away from you in that order. You also want to heal yourself for the damage dealt, just another way to keep yourself alive here. You could choose not to run this and then be able to swap right to the blunderbuss. I think like a couple frames quicker, and we'll actually show that in a second. So, for example, if I go, this is me spamming. I spammed the weapon swap. Hold on. And we're also dressed for Santa's shotgun build, as you can see here. So that's about how it goes if you don't have that selected. But honestly, like the second hit here is a spin attack all around you pretty much, except for like literally a very small cone behind you. I would recommend running this still. There's been plenty of times that this perk right here has actually saved my life. Because I actually killed the person with very low HP. And I don't think I would have landed the blunderbuss shot because of the way dodge and aim lock works, but we'll get to that in a little bit. You could run critical damage keen edge instead of this point here. This is the only because I would like heal you more or 10% more, so it'd be like you were healing 11% instead of just 10%. But I don't think that's necessarily truly worth it, all things considered here. You could run this as well because this is Great Axe attacks, but you're really not using the Great Axe as a weapon damage or as a damage weapon, so I really wouldn't recommend it. And you really shouldn't be left clicking very often. So if you're running Greed, you're kind of throwing, in my opinion. And you have to run a point on this side. You can't run heavy pull or gravity here. Simply put, because you want to run bloodlust here. So that's why ultimately I'm going to say I'm going to run this. We could also run critical condition here instead of feed. In fact, I actually think I kind of threw here. We're going to respec here. Do not run feed here. And I'll make sure this is shown in the tree if it isn't already. I'm paranoid, so I'm going to go check real quick. Oh, mysteriously, it just fixed itself. Crazy. Yeah, I don't know why I was running feed. That's such a throw. Upload and share. Sweet. So now I have the new link, and we'll be able to. The link down below will be posted correctly, so people shouldn't be confused. And then 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, one could argue because it's not a defensive, like for the 10% in power here. Could probably just take this off and actually run feed. Damn, like that's what I love about the weapon tree is like I even when I think that like hey we have the absolute optimal build, like there's still gonna be ways. Yeah, because like I think having the extra 10% healing on top of that means that these are both getting enhanced. So now I'm at 20% healing if they're low HP and I crit on them. That's absolutely huge. Yeah, fuck it. This is what we're gonna do. We ball. I'll definitely. I'll talk on the stream if I think this was a throw, but we'll see. Because like ultimately, 10% in power means 1% more healing, where this is a whole ass other 10%, 10% more healing. I'll also still be able to have that higher crit chance to trigger that heal by default. So that's the Great Axe tree in a nutshell here. Now, Blunderbuss. So there's 3 different trees we can do here. The one thing that's going to be guaranteed every single tree, though, is going to be pretty much this. So these 6 trees are the only things that 100% you're going to run. Well, actually, technically, it'll be this as well. So it's really just about where these last 9 points go. We run 150 intelligence by default. So if you're running 150 intelligence, you definitely want to be running barbed netting. One could argue that once elemental band is unlocked again and actually available um, to be used, that barbed or that instead of running Ankh, one could argue you run elemental band because you have access to multiple damage sources already with blunderbuss. So regardless, though, that's what we have so far, right? So if we're gonna go for my no shit standard build, what I run in OPRs by default, it's gonna basically look like this here. Because I love claw shot. Somebody actually recommended me using it off the rip. I wish I had listened to them sooner. But claw shot is just so good. So claw shot, there's some caveats to this, but I'm going to talk very high level through the abilities. We'll go through the splitting grenade first. The splitting grenade, you toss a grenade up, and then you can press it again, or once it lands, it'll explode into smaller grenades, which is where that plague splitting grenade's weapon perk comes from, right? Or like comes into play. Like the second grenade hit has to hit them, not the first. The what's nice about this is it does increase base damage to targets below greater than 50% health, so it's a great opening move, specifically. Then any grenades hit give you a haste that's once again increased by the alacrity and haste ridden shoes, sitting at a 5.5 second haste, give or take. The incendiary bursts here, splitting grenades, explosions inflict burn on the hit, doing 10% weapon damage, stacking up to 3 times. So if you hit them with all 3 procs, right? If you hit them with all 3 procs of this, like that can be a huge. That's a 30% burn on top of the disdain affliction you're running on your blunderbuss, which increases the potency of it. Like you're basically doing it a third of a weapon shot every tick of this. At like your like average, I would say. Netshot is great because it slows the target it hits by 40% for 3 seconds, right? But you can make it so that instead it does a 50% slow that it degrades. Now, right about the 2.5 seconds in is when it'll be less than 40% you'd see here. So like I can see why a lot of people are actually saying not to run this, but from what I have found, that 50% slow that it starts initially over 7 seconds, they're covering less distance than they would if I only snared them for 40% for 3 seconds. The barbed netting, this changes the damage, so like it's a little bit less upfront damage and a lot more bleed damage. But the point is that like we're trying to get our bleeds going so that our natural burst doesn't have to be as much, right? It's still a lot, to be clear, but it doesn't have. We don't have to hit the absolute peaks in order to actually one shot people. We can be like halfway there, and we're already popping off. Claw shot. Claw shot is great because what it like first it can bring you up to. Well, it definitely pulls you more than 3 meters. Just to be clear here, I've been pulled like 10 to 14 meters before even. So maybe claw shot is broken in this capacity and needs to be fixed. But I actually really enjoy how the claw shot works, and the fact that aim lock actually hurts the player if they want to utilize claw shot effectively, in my opinion. What's nice though about claw shot is you get 8 stamina every second once you've used it. Now note, you don't even have to hit with it. You just get the stamina regen. I think that needs to be changed, to be honest. Like blunderbuss is incredibly strong. That's one of the ways I would nerf blunderbuss because it just makes it so I can escape so much easier. That with all the other energy we have in our build is very like we can stand out and still very easily recover, especially because we can use claw shot to escape. Combat readiness, you lands a pellet, even if blocked, lowers the cooldown of this ability by 2% each. It's pretty satisfactory. Like every time you hit, so your default shots, right, are hitting 6 pellets. If all 6 pellets hit, that's 12% cooldown reduction on your claw shot. 12%. That doesn't take into account all the other refreshing you have in your build naturally, things like this. That's reducing it. So like if you've already done the other 2 abilities after this, that's another 8%. So that's 20% of the cooldown you don't have to worry about. Like it's very easy to keep your cooldowns going with this type of build. Mobile overload here, successful. This is a must run. Like this is one of the biggest value adds of Claw Shot here. Successful pulls will automatically grant one loaded ammunition. If you currently have two loaded ammunition, will succeed the max cap and grant a third. So in OPR, there's wolves on the way to middle. What I'll do sometimes is I'll stop A to get Azoth and B to just use Claw Shot on one of the wolves, so I start off with 3 shots when I get into the fight. But this can be huge when paired with like if you're running Claw Shot and you can't run deep load, you're losing out on 50% base damage just from the ability, technically. Not even mentioning the 15% increase or 7.5 essentially because you fire 2 shots, right, and only one of them gets affected, increased your average DPS. The haste here, once again, this is a 1 second haste, so we only go from like 1 second to like 1.85 or 1.84 or so seconds. But that's okay in my opinion. Like 1.84 seconds means that like you get a little bit of an actual run with this, and this paired with any other haste or any other stacking haste can be a good in between for while you're trying to get your Tempest stacks up. Because max haste is 50%. So it's very easy to get haste for everywhere else in your build, which makes this a little bit less valuable. But the reason I keep this up is ultimately uptime is the name of the game. There's going to be times where you get oblivioned and you lose all your hastes, and this will be the difference between you living or not. But remember, this is on a successful reload. Something I still even have trouble with is I will dodge right before the reload finishes. It's something that people, but like I'll do that because it was either that or I was going to get hit by an ability, right? Sometimes you just have to accept the fact that that reload is not going to happen. Ramp, because the blunderbuss is the main weapon here, I think this is a must-run perk, especially for this weapon tree here, because then you're sitting on a 12% in power, or sorry, a 16% in power by default, and is a huge part of where your damage can come from. And then of course there's 2 fortifies that you can grab, or 3 technically. This one though takes 2 points to actually grab. But fortifying aggression and on a roll, I pick on a roll because it lasts 10 seconds and it's very easy for me to stack this, and my abilities come up very quickly. So I get a lot of value out of on a roll, in my opinion. Now this is my default, right? If I was playing in a war and I was really focused on impact, like wanting to just keep my CCs up, instead of running claw shot, my weapon perk would actually, or my weapon tree would look more like this. We don't really care as much about deep load. We're not running claw shot, so you don't get that extra burst value. This is still pretty valuable, right? The only thing I'd probably replace for deep load would be the fortify, but I think in a war setting, that extra 10% fortify means that you're sitting at 25% fortify, but potentially with the potential for another 50% if you get actually like chunked. But this is what I would run in a war setting here. The only ability that's new to this here is blast shot. Blast immense wind out of the blunderbuss, knocking down a target immediately in front of you. It has grit, which means you can use it to avoid a stagger. So like when I run this, I use this to trade into spears very easily, because if they go to sweep me and I pull out the blast shot, and I time it appropriately, what will happen is the shot will actually keep me standing and then knock them back, which then applies a huge rend, right? 10% rend for 6 seconds to all targets affected by the ability, even if they grit through it, is huge. I don't think the movement speed is really that necessary. So instead I go last chance. Who would have guessed? We end up going with bite back. This could probably be swapped out, in my opinion, for buckshot just to get that initial increased burst. But I think every form of cooldown reduction is valuable here, especially when you're working with double down. And we've got to talk about double down to truly understand to make this build work. With double down, the first ability you use, you lose a 50% reduction, right? When you have an ability like netshot here, where just by hitting it, it reduces it by 20%. That means if you hit it and it's the first one, you just reduce this cooldown by 70% of the base cooldown length, right? So the base cooldown length of netshot, I'm just double checking to make sure I'm correct on this. Or it's just not showing me because I have it in grid form. No. Just because I have like 3 stacks of refreshing, I have refreshing naturally in my kit. So I just want to double check. Great Axe, no, Blunderbuss. So the base cooldown of netshot is 20 seconds. So if we have a 70% reduction of that cooldown, we're reducing that cooldown by 14 seconds by default, right? And my cooldown with all the refreshing is 17.6 seconds. So that means 3.6 seconds. And every time I fire with the bite back, hold on, I'm just trying to make sure I have the numbers correct before I say this. That removes 0.1 seconds. So let's say you get 2 shots off, right? That's still only 0.2 seconds. So that's why like that's only if you get like that's 2 pellets, right? If you can get 4 pellets, this is why I say like this build is very powerful if you don't use aim lock, especially. If you get 4 pellets, that's 2% down, so that's 0.4 of a second. If you hit all 6 pellets, it's like 0.6 of a second. So if you get 2 shots, that's 1.6. So if I hit a net shot, if I do a net shot, and both shots, I somehow am able to land. Every shot is a headshot. That's still only 1.2 seconds down. I don't think that's worth it. Especially, so like I'm actually going to remove this from my recommendation. I honestly, I thought it would be worthwhile just because of the fact that like it is cooldown reduction over time for all of your abilities. But instead, what I'm going to say is it's either going to be, you can either go extended chamber here, because why not have an extra round, especially because you're not running deep load here, or buckshot. Um, but obviously, you're always going to run double down here. But I'm probably going to mess around with extended chamber next time I run this build here. So that's the second build, right? Now, double down is so powerful that one could make the argument like, hey, I want to run claw shot and I want to run double down. I want to have that same cooldown ability with claw shot, right? The problem is you have to literally give up all of your passes basically. Unless you go to a 2 point net shot, because I think you still need to run at least fast hands. But let's say you do that, right? You give up apparatus. You know, you have your weapon points over here. We can get rid of these two. Instead, we'll go buckshot. We have to now go artillery into last chance. We still go the extended chamber here and double down. And now I have one perk I can grab here. Now, because we're running claw shot, that means guaranteed I'm going to want to run deep load, right? But I can't run ramp, and that's a 16% damage increase. This is still more guaranteed burst, but this is higher DPS. So this is why like I really truly don't recommend this build. So 5 here. Like these are all the points that you have to play with. That is it. 8 points. You have to run this. You obviously have to run your 2 abilities here, right? You have to run fast hands. Claw shot makes you run the entire weapon tree in order to get that reload shot. So like if I'm running this, I'm probably gonna just run ramp regardless because I'm already going to have because like you don't have to land shots, so it's very easy to just have ramp up before you even go in. Um, the problem though is that then they hear you coming, so just be aware of that. But 6 seconds is a long time. Run and gun is another perk that's pretty great. Hey, what's up, Madhouse Gamer? Welcome to the show. We're trying to do a deep dive into Great Axe Blunderbuss here, so people can start running this build and see how absolutely easy it is. Yeah, or you can run and gun. But no, ultimately, my point here is you don't get all of the passives that you get to keep up normally. Now, this still could work, so feel free to try it. But otherwise, like these are the 3 weapon trees that I'd recommend. We're gonna go to the default one, and then we'll kind of talk through. We'll talk through all the other nitty gritty details. At this point, we've covered stats, we've covered armor, we've covered abilities. Now, what we'll do is we'll cover the actual rotations, right? We kind of talked about this a little bit through the abilities. Ultimately, using net shot, if you're chasing somebody, you want to make sure that you are pushing forward with that net shot. Let me just finish my default, just because we'll be doing OPR after this. Yeah. All right, so who the fuck is this guy? I mean, I'll take 100 hearty meals, sure. That was random. All right, so with netshot, if you do not hold any directional movement or you're going to the back, what'll happen is you'll knock yourself back here. This is very powerful for creating distance, especially with the fact that it is slowing the opponent. Hey, thanks for the follow, Petite Prince. Now, well, let's wait for it to come up. You see how long it lasts if you don't hit it. It's very important that you always hit your net shot. Now, if you're moving forward, though, you'll slow down for a second to fire it, but you will continue to move forward. So, like, you can use this either as a chasing ability or an escape ability. Claw shot. One of my most favorite uses for this is when people are chasing me and I have them locked on and I'm just kiting them back. I'll cycle to the person all the way in the back, and then I'll just claw shot to them, and then I'll dodge past. Net shot, bro, the amount of ankles I've broken with that move, it is crazy. Especially because, like, as I turn around and then run, I'm throwing this down. So they have to run through this if they want to keep the same distance. And that gives me another 30% haste on a 6-second cooldown. And it also refreshes your Tempest Fury. It doesn't only have to be left clicks. So overall, like, the build is very, like, you pick the fights that you, like, if you die to 3 to 4 people on you, it's because you were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Simply put, like, this build is 90% positioning. Now, we're always going to be unlucky, especially when we're trying to impact the fight. And sometimes you're going to get 5+ people chasing you just because you're using a blunderbuss, if we're going to be real here. But you have the tools that, depending, at least for the most part, like 90% of the weapons that you'll be fighting don't do enough damage or can't keep up with you well enough to actually kill you. Especially with the fact that you have a lot of ways to remove debuffs off your build. If, for example, with your Firestorm. Your Firestorm also applies a weaken and it also applies a slow. And then for your Great Axe, things to be aware of. Let me put a consumable on that I don't care about. Yeah, we'll do this. So with Whirlwind, if you just Whirlwind, you get a movement speed, but you'll slow down, and that animation is where you stop, right? But there's ways to bypass that stop. We'll have to wait for it to come up. It probably would have been better if I did this in a... I think there's like a dummy right outside of Brightwood. So we'll teleport there real quick. Come on, my loyal drumstick. Take me to the west side of town. Man, I should have gotten a house over. Well, I don't have a house in Brightwood, but if I did, it'd be a house on the left side, just so I could fucking really quickly get over here. Oh wait, am I the only one who feels like turkeys are faster than other mounts? I don't know, I think it's just because they're small, but they feel so much faster. I mean, NPCs work, right? But anyways, something that you can do here is spam charge, and then right when you're able to cancel out of it, instead of having to kind of stop and swing, right? You're able to just spin out. Now, note if you're using it offensively, you can actually force that left click instead of the animation here. And what I'll do is I'll hit a couple of these mobs just to speed it up. So you can spin here, and if you just spam left click, instead of that recovery animation, you can just left click instead. So it adds a little bit extra burst. Kind of like the last hit on Raging Torrent for Hatchet. But yeah, and then the Reap is pretty awesome. So for example, let's see. It's hard for me to ping, but like, look at how far you're able to pull this thing, and then ultimately you heal from it. You could also get crippling Reap on instead of a claw shot for your gloves, but I don't find myself using this nearly as offensively. That the slow would be worth it. Completely. Like, I definitely think like the empowering claw shot would be worth it more so. But if you're not running the claw shot, I'd probably run Reap here in this situation. And then ability wise, right? Like just to show you, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change all my points to be stamina, so I don't actually kill these things. I mean, I still damage here. Yeah, because these are level 27 mobs. No shit, huh? But the point I'm trying to make here is like the haste lasts a very long time, and then the haste will pop off of all of your like ability damage as well. So it's very easy to just keep your haste up very naturally. Something you got to be good at though is when you're using the aim lock here, right? If somebody dodges, you will miss your ability and your shots guaranteed. If you see somebody dodging, just wait like a half second and then fire. Otherwise, the way to do this would be to like turn off your aim lock. Where are you? Come on, show me another mob. Oh, we already killed them all. Neat. Oh, okay. Here's a doe. So let's say like this is the mount, right? So like, hey, I'm aiming. I turn it off. I aim the shot, and that's something you got to be aware of because like when you disconnect the aim lock, it doesn't matter where you're looking as long as it's on your screen, right? Now, if there's a lot of people, it might not. You want to try and look as close as possible, but I haven't found a way to like guarantee who it aim locks on, to be honest. So like that just takes some practice. I think it's actually really like that portion of aim lock is actually really rather balanced. How it impacts dodges specifically, how it impacts people spinning around you. There are ways to get around it, but ultimately, like when somebody's like really close to you and spinning, it's very easy to make them just kind of miss all of their shots. So you have to be aware of that and like pay attention to your character where they're looking. Let's see. What have we covered so far? We've covered stats. We covered the different splits that you can do here. One thing I forgot to cover was how Magnify impacts your build. Once you get to the point where you're 725'd out, you're pretty much going to have full Magnify at that point, right? You're pretty much forced to run 350 strength at that point. So the only way to run 150 int is also if you're like full 725 out, you're then able to still run 150 constitution. Now you can run that, but I actually at that point, especially if you have Ankh, I'd probably run the 50 focus instead of the 150 con. Just depends on how much you're facing ranged players. Like if I'm facing a lot of ranged players, I'm probably going to run 150 con to get the crit damage reduction. If I'm facing a lot of melee players, I'm going to run that 50 focus so that I can get that increase to the incoming healing and that increase 5% refreshing that you essentially get, or 5% ability cooldown reduction, because 5% cooldown ability reduction from 20 seconds, right? That's 1 second out of the 3.4 seconds, and we didn't even account for any of the refreshing that we're already running. And I have 3 stacks of refreshing, right? That's 12% refreshing. So that's another 3 seconds. So your net shot's literally up instantaneously. So you fire your net shot, you wait the time for your slow to wear off, you fire it again, somebody's net shot for potentially 14 seconds. Like if they don't die in those 14 seconds, they have to be a healer and no one else is damaging them with you. Simply put. We went over artifacts, haste synergy, how shirking heals and healing breeze is a must, how Ankh is in a massive increase to this, including that 50 focus. We talked about the 3 weapon trees you can run: unload tree, CC tree, the claw CC tree. Heart rune choices we didn't cover, so let's go over that real quick. By default, I've actually been enjoying the brutal heart rune of fire. Now note it does do fire damage, so it is a reduced like a lot of people do run fire resistance objectively, so you don't do as much damage. But the people who don't run it, like for example healers, like this thing chunks, especially because like empower can be such a massive increase to this. Now note, any weapon specific empower does not stay on when you fire this, because you're essentially putting your weapon away to kick. It's any other form of empower that you have, either through attribute breakpoints or etc. Like for example, this does 15% more damage because I'm running 150 intelligence. The other weapon heart runes you can run here, I would say, would be the cunning heart rune of Bile Bomb, just because it's another disease. It inflicts a slow 20% for 3 seconds. The exhausting bile piece here. Now remember, the slow is on hit. not just the cloud, right? Exhausting bile inflicts exhaust on hit, reducing the target stamina regeneration by 30%, which can be huge because then they can't dodge as nearly as much. It's crazy. Otherwise, the only other weapon perk I probably would run, uh, it's rough. Maybe brutal detonate, but like you're not trying to be that close. So it'd probably be stone form of some kind. Probably the ones that don't reduce your damage. You could probably even run the explosive one because it's more about just the CC reduction it gives you, and then you have a little bit of an extra burst at the end of that. I would not run brutal heart rune of vines personally. Mainly because it inflicts a 50% stamina regeneration reduction on you for 5 seconds, and that's massive. Like the weaken's nice, don't get me wrong. The damage you do is nice, like that's still like a 2k damage burst, and it can crit, right? But it's not worth it in my opinion. Just simply put. So yeah, at this point, the only things that we've already talked about the passives you have to run as well. We talked about the rotations. We talked about aim lock, but just to really get this through people's head. While yes, aim lock definitely makes the minimum amount of shots you fire hit more. A good player, it's still very easy to outplay somebody using aim lock. Now that being said, a good player using aim lock like myself, I know the points of weakness and I just play around that, right? So like when you dodge, I just wait a little bit longer to fire. Or like I'll basically play on autopilot where I will fire as quick as possible until I see that somebody understands how to dodge at the right rate to dodge my shots, and then I just I'm just gonna mix it up essentially, fire my shots a little bit slower and wait till I have that burst window before I actually go in on them, or wait till they run out of stamina essentially because they only have so many dodges, right? Um, you could also like you could play around and figure it out from here. I didn't really go over the attribute break points, but a lot of them are pretty valuable here. But a lot of them also really don't matter, in my opinion. Any ones that increase your ability to go from an exhausted state to not exhausted is pretty valuable. So that's why like strength is going to be our primary attribute here. I'm not running a food right now, but if I was, I'd either run more strength here or I'd run more constitution. The 200 intelligence is not worth it whatsoever in any capacity. I just it's not worth it. It's just not worth it here. One could argue that you could go 250 intel here, and you really wouldn't lose as much damage as you would think. You also don't really get much from this specific weapon perk, whereas this right here is a 10%, or sorry, is a 30% duration increase to apply damage over time, which can be pretty massive. I think the burst is worth more than just the increase in dots. Uh, yeah, I'm not. I was gonna talk through the attribute breakpoints, but honestly, I'm just pay attention to the ones at the end. All the others you're gonna get by default, right? Like the 10% increased elemental damage is massive because we're converting our damage. I'm personally running an abyssal empowered, but like you could literally run anything else as long as it's not literally fire damage. You should be fine. Or if you're in war, I wouldn't run electrifying if you're anywhere near group 10 because you're just giving the enemy team more of a reason to run electric absorption potions specifically. For Constitution, the real big question is the 10% weapon critical damage taken is pretty huge. 10% increase of physical and elemental armor. That's basically a 10% fortify. That's just up all the time. That can be pretty valuable, especially in a war setting if you're finding that you're dying a lot. The way you can kind of play around this, unless you're like min max where I'm running like 350, 150, 150, is running 152 constitution so that you can just run or you can swap between rabbit fit food and like the rabbit and vegetable shit and the new fish for strength, and then you can just kind of cycle based off how the game is going. I personally remember, once again, I really recommend running 50 focus, but you have to figure out what you're willing to give for that. The last, and for those of you who have watched this far, the last alteration I would do is instead of running Ankh even, what you can run is Bloodthirster or Blood Drinker because you heal from your damage. You pretty much remove your ability to kill anybody who's being healed. But if you're getting chased by like 2 to 3 players and none of them are healers and or like the only heals they have is from potions and circle heals, you can still kill them and then stay very healthy. Excuse me. With this, because that's you're not. It's not just a 25% life steal. You're healing for a third of the damage you do. You're just also giving up a third of the damage you were doing. So it's like you're changing out one third of the damage you're doing just to heal more, alongside all the other healing that you have throughout this weapon tree. It can be pretty valuable in my opinion. So because like this plus if you're critting on a whirlwind, for example, you're now looking at like 50 something percentage healing. For blunderbuss, like I wouldn't really like it's really just the fact that you're shooting that is valuable. For like you're getting constant DPS, so you're getting constant heals in that sense. But I still think Ankh will be the de facto default to run with this build. And then consumables wise, I usually run with oak flesh and with flame pots on me. As ultimately, even with people splitting damage, flame potions are the superior defensive for magic, in my opinion, because most damage or most burst you're going to face is going to be fire damage. All right, well, this has basically been a 55-minute dive on this build. Damn, that's crazy. 55 minutes. I'm not even going to trim this either. I'm literally just going to refresh this and kick it. Stay tuned. I'm snoozing the ad here. We're going to cut the stream just so I can upload this to YouTube real quick. And then I'm going to immediately relaunch it. So just give me one moment. So I just got to set Twitch to be able to export it. I have to actually like turn off the stream. And then we'll actually get into some OPRs.